Let's talk about wide receivers you should start or sit in week 10 of the fantasy football season. We've got 4 teams on a bye: the Bengals, Cowboys, Chiefs, and Titans, which means you will have no Jamar Chase, no T. Higgins, no CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy. There are uber important players that are not going to be in your lineup, but don't worry, in today's video, we're going to go through every single matchup. You're going to know my rankings for every single receiver, and there are time codes if you want to go to a specific part of the video. Let's start off with Thursday Night Football. We've got the Raiders at the Broncos, a divisional matchup, 42.5 point over under. Now, the Broncos are heavy favorites in this one. They're actually tied for the largest spread of the week in favor of the Denver Broncos, 9.5 point spread there. Now, this will be an interesting game because it'll be the first game we see the Raiders without Jakobi Meyers. If I had to guess, obviously, if you don't know, Jakobi Meyers went to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a 4th and 6th round pick. If I had to guess, if you were going to throw a Hail Mary and play one of these names, it would be Trey Tucker. However, Jack Bech is the most obvious name to fill the Jakobi Meyers role. That doesn't mean he'll be the number 1 wide receiver, but to play that guy that can play inside, outside, Jack Bech is that player. That's what he was coming out of TCU. I'm really excited to see if they feature him this week, but you can't play him. You got to be reasonable, right? Trey Tucker is the only risky start you can consider, but he is a Hail Mary at best as well. It's a terrible matchup, terrible offense, and a short week Thursday night. Do you really want to see what your weekend looks like after playing Trey Tucker? I don't know. I don't want to see that, but maybe he's your best option. On the opposite side with the Broncos, it's a great matchup. The Raiders are the 8th best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. I do think Sutton is a must start. I do believe he gets into the end zone and gets back on track in this game. Troy Franklin has been out targeting Courtland Sutton in plenty of games this year, so he's actually not a terrible desperation play this week. My only concern is they might not need to throw the ball as much to Troy Franklin in this game as they had in previous games where they faced competent offenses on the opposite side. So I do think Sutton's a must start. I do believe he gets back on track. Okay, we do have an international game this week. That is in Berlin, Deutschland. Falcons at the Colts, 48.5 point over under. High over under for an international game. The Colts are favored by 6.5 points. Let's dive into this matchup. The Colts receivers have been awesome in the last couple weeks. I mean, Michael Pittman's been a superstar. Alec Pierce is breaking out in front of our eyes. Josh Downs has been relevant. Even last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, all 3 of these guys were incredible plays. And obviously, the game plan had a little bit to do with that because the Colts were down the entire game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but Pittman had 21. Downs was 17. Pierce was 17. All these guys were eating. Everybody had a piece of the pie. Now they face the Falcons. It's a much more difficult matchup against the Falcons. The Falcons are a bottom 3rd matchup against receivers. However, I'm going to label Pittman a must start, and I think both Pierce and Downs are playable options in your fantasy lineups this week. It's a high over under. I do believe that the Colts should get back on track. Now, on the opposite side, who out there had Drake London in their lineups this week, like me in the Flock League, and still lost? Fantasy football has been so fun this year. I can't believe I got to watch Drake London put up a 3-touchdown day for nothing, in my fantasy league at least. But he's my wide receiver 4. Here's the problem. The concern is that the Colts just traded for Sauce Gardner. So this Colts secondary was a cupcake matchup every single week before they traded for Sauce Gardner. Now, the benefit for Drake London is Gardner's going to have to learn a new system, a new team, a new city. He's going to be overseas as well. It's not like Sauce Gardner's going to be completely locked and loaded week 1, but it's definitely not preferable for Drake London. Regardless, you're going to play him. Okay, let's move on to the start of the first Sunday slate of games. Saints at Panthers, low over under. Panthers are heavy favorites, understandably so, because the Saints, there's no nice way to put this. They suck. They're bad. They're really, really bad. Unfortunately, the change at quarterback to Tyler Shuck, I understand why the Saints did it because they're going to have a high pick this year. There's plenty of interesting quarterback prospects, and they might not think they have their future quarterback on the roster, but they spent a 2nd round pick on Tyler Shuck, so they have to do their due diligence. Right now, we can all agree Rattler is the better quarterback in the NFL. but the Saints have to figure out what they have in Tyler Shuck. Now, that's very disappointing for Chris Olave because before Rattler went out, you had a locked and loaded must start each and every week player with Chris Olave, and I'm not sure that you have that anymore. Last week, the first game with Tyler Shuck, Chris Olave had just 3 targets. Just 3 targets. Now, the benefit is no more Rashid Shaheed. Rashid Shaheed will no longer be on this team. He was traded to the Seattle Seahawks. So I guess you can spin the narrative. Well, they got to target someone, right, guys? I don't know what it's worth with Tyler Shuck being behind that offensive line. I'm not sure what it's worth in one of the worst matchups in fantasy football against the Panthers. They've got a pretty good secondary as well. I'm starting Olave out of respect as a flexible name this week, but he is not a must start. It's a bad matchup, bad quarterback, bad offense. On the opposite side, I do think McMillan is a must start. The Saints defense is really bad. Typically, you attack them on the ground, and I do think Rico Dowdle is going to have a huge week. But Tetairoa McMillan, you're going to start him. He is dominating first read target share. Every number from a usage perspective, he is dominating. They just don't throw the ball much, but you're going to start Tetairoa McMillan. Okay, let's go to the Giants at the Bears. High over under in this one, 48.5 points. The Bears are favored by 3.5 points. Wan'Dale Robinson, this might surprise some of you guys, but he's a must start for me. He really is. I mean, he came out last week, had 10 targets. Now, it didn't turn into like the biggest fantasy day, but 13.6 points. He's got a safe floor. He's always, a threat for the end zone. We saw that on Thursday Night Football against the Eagles recently. He's the number 1 receiver for this team. It's not even close. Wan'Dale Robinson is a must start. I do think this should be a very competitive game. I do see the Giants down in this game and needing to throw the ball. That's why I like Wan'Dale so much. Now, Slayton is not the worst play either. In one of his first games back, he had 7 targets, 51 snaps, a lot of routes run. He's a heavy, important part of this team. He had over 11 PPR points. Not a bad play. On the opposite side there, I am going to put Rome Odunze straight back into my lineup. We can't overreact too much based off of one single game. Yes, it was frustrating, I'm sure, if you owned him, to see him come out there and only get 2 targets, no catches. I'm sure that was frustrating, no doubt about it. However, you got to take the entirety of this season when you're making weekly rankings, right? And for the majority of the year, he's been a pretty decent player. DJ Moore is a spot start in a really good matchup against the Giants, and I'm not going to chase the Zacchaeus matchup based off what he did last week. I do believe we'll see Luther Burden out there as well, which will limit the upside of a Zacchaeus. Okay, let's go to the Jags at the Texans. 38.5 point over under, one of the lowest of the week. It's also a close spread, 1.5 points, but the Texans are favored. It's in Houston. Really, outside of Nico Collins, who's a must start, he has a decent matchup against the Jags. They're middle of the pack against wide receivers. And whether CJ Stroud plays or not, Davis Mills was heavily targeting Nico Collins anyway. It doesn't matter. Nico Collins is going into your lineup. It should be a competitive game. Nico should be the most important weapon for the Texans. On the opposite side here, we get to see Jakobi Meyers for the first time. It is a short week, so I wouldn't anticipate seeing like his full role in this offense deployed just yet. But they did go out there and trade a 4th and 6th round pick for him. We're not going to see Brian Thomas this week, in my opinion, with that ankle injury. Maybe you hear something else, but I haven't heard anything. I'm just projecting him not to be out there. And of course, we know Travis Hunter's on IR. So Jakobi Meyers and Parker Washington are low-end wide receiver 3s, high-end wide receiver 4s. It's a terrible matchup. The Texans defense is so good. It's the worst matchup for wide receivers. So maybe if it was a better matchup, I would go out there and chase Parker Washington and Jakobi Meyers, but they're really not that great plays this week. They would only be good in fantasy if it was because of volume. They're out there and getting 10 targets each or something. To be fair, there's no one else to target, so you can run with that narrative if you want, but low over under. The Texans are favored. Short week for Jakobi Meyers. Terrible matchup. I would lean towards not playing these names. They are true Hail Marys at best. Let's go to the Bills at the Dolphins here. 49.5 point over under. The Bills are favored by 9.5 points. That is tied for the largest spread of the week in favor of the Bills here. Now, the Bills wide receiver room is becoming more and more clear each and every week. We are starting to see Khalil Shakir really take over this wide receiver room. Last week, he had 8 targets, turned those 8 targets into just 11 points. That's the problem with Shakir, is most of his targets come at the line of scrimmage. or short area, intermediate passing game. So he's not really ever being targeted down the field like a Jameson would be, or, one of these big play threats. So he does have a safe floor, but not a high ceiling. However, if you're going to start any of these guys, it's going to be Khalil Shakir. On the opposite side, Jalen Waddle will continue to be the most obvious start. It's really, when you look at the Dolphins, it's quite simple. You start Devon Achane and you start Jalen Waddle, right? He is being featured as a number one wide receiver. It's been great for fantasy football. 9 targets on Thursday Night Football last week against the Ravens. Turn that into 14 PPR points. He has a safe floor, has a high upside. Tua is going to remain the starter, and they're going to be down in this game needing to throw. So it's a good game script. I have Waddle as my wide receiver 11 this week. Before we jump into the next matchup, I got to tell you guys about a completely free feature on the Flock Fantasy site. You can get it by using the promo code LAND and creating a free account. There's no money involved, right? But it's the My Teams feature, which lets you see expert consensus opinion on your entire league, your team, and see where you rank, see recent trades. One of the awesome free features on the site. So check that out in the pinned comment if you want to have a secret weapon that a lot of your league probably doesn't. Moving on to the Ravens at the Vikings, 47.5 point over under. The Ravens are favored by 4.5 points. For Zay Flowers' sake, you hope that the Vikings make this a competitive game. I'm not suggesting they wouldn't, by the way, but it's just when the Ravens are up in games, Zay Flowers is typically useless because they don't really need to throw the ball. I'm anticipating this being a very close game, both teams in it. So that's why I do think you should start Zay Flowers with some confidence this week. On the opposite side of this matchup, it was great to see Justin Jefferson last week be the preferred option for JJ McCarthy. He had 9 targets, got into the end zone. It was only 47 yards, but still got into the end zone. That's great to see. Addison was not as involved as we wanted him to be, but hopefully this is a more competitive game. It is a very good matchup against the Ravens secondary that has been really bad this year. I know they've had injuries, but you can definitely exploit them through the air. So, honestly, McCarthy isn't the worst streaming option if you lost Jaden Daniels. Jefferson and Jordan Addison are not terrible plays this week. Okay, moving on to the Browns at the Jets. Lowest over-under of the week at 37.5 points. And honestly, I get it. Like, these teams suck. These teams are bad. The Jets and the Browns are awful. And I'm so sorry if any of you are going to this game in real life. It's not going to be fun to watch. You can't start a Browns receiver. That's for damn sure. You just can't. Dylan Gabriel does not like throwing the ball deep, and they're not going to catch the ball anyway if he does. On the opposite side, if Garrett Wilson plays, play him. Great. You can play him simply because of how talented he is. Clearly the number one weapon in this offense. That's why you play him, even though it's not the best matchup. Now, here's what I'll say about the Jets. A.D. Mitchell is interesting. If you can go out there and stash A.D. Mitchell in a dynasty league, or if you're in a deep 16-team league, for example, he's always been a talented guy, just never had opportunity. I guess he didn't really convert on it, but hasn't had consistent opportunity, where there's not someone over his shoulder waiting to take his job. There's nobody in New York waiting to take A.D. Mitchell's job as a number 2 receiver if he can prove himself. Okay, moving on to the Patriots at the Buccaneers. Stephon Diggs would be the only name I'm really comfortable playing with the Patriots. It's a decent matchup, high over under, should be a very competitive game. I wouldn't be shocked if both receivers are getting a lot of targets from their quarterbacks. Look, Boutte's not going to play. Boutte's not going to be out there, I don't think, with that hamstring injury. I did label Douglas a must sit. My problem is, I guess you could play Demario Douglas, but the concern for me is maybe Hunter Henry has a big game, or we see the running backs more involved in the air, or potentially we go out and see, even Austin Hooper get involved. The ball is just spread out around so evenly. I struggle to trust anyone outside of Diggs, but it's a decent matchup, decent game to play Douglas if you're in a desperate spot. On the opposite side, I'm living in 2 worlds. The first world is Chris Godwin's not active. And in that world, of course, Igbuka is a must start, but then Tez Johnson also becomes really interesting. Great matchup. Both teams can put up points. Both teams are respectable. So Tez Johnson could be a legitimate flex this week. Now, the other world I'm living in is if Chris Godwin is active and back. And if he's active and back, then I don't trust Tez Johnson as much. You can flex Chris Godwin. He'll be a fine floor play, but Tez Johnson's ceiling is certainly zapped in that world. Okay, let's move on to the Cardinals at the Seahawks. So, very interesting game, obviously, because Marvin Harrison finally broke out on Monday Night Football against the Cowboys. Now, was it the chicken or the egg, right? The Cowboys or Kyler Murray? Well, here's what we know for sure. Kyler Murray is going to be out at least 4 to 8 weeks with his foot injury. Jonathan Gannon came out and said even if Kyler was healthy, he was probably going to go with Jacoby Brissett, which is weird because 24 hours before that, he said he wasn't going to. Oh, whatever. Okay, now he's going with Jacoby Brissett. And it makes sense because with Brissett, they're averaging more yards per game, almost 100 more yards per game, double their touchdowns per game, and they're averaging almost 6 or 7 more points per game. Well, it's, 6 more points per game with Jacoby Brissett as their starter. He's able to run the offense much more effectively than Kyler Murray has been able to this year. And honestly, if you own Marvin Harrison, you should be rejoicing. This is fantastic. You want Jacoby Brissett out there throwing the ball to Marvin Harrison. On Sunday Night Football, Marvin got 10 targets. You love to see it. And he turned those 10 targets into 7 catches, 96 yards and a touchdown. That's what you've been dreaming of. Here's the tough part. The Seahawks, while they're a middle of the pack matchup technically in strength of schedule, they haven't had their full secondary healthy until last week against the Commanders. This is going to be a much more difficult defense than I think we're anticipating. So that's the difficult part about the Marvin Harrison matchup, but you're going to put him into your lineups. Of course, you're starting JSN. It will be interesting to see Rashid Shaheed in this offense for the first time. He's actually the perfect fit for the offense. Cooper Kupp is not stretching the field vertically. Rashid Shaheed is going to do that. So I would not be concerned about JSN losing any sort of target share. He's on track to have one of the first 2,000 yard seasons of all time because he's elite, because he's fantastic. So I don't think they're going to stop targeting him. But Shaheed is going to be, a fun Hail Mary play. Maybe he is the Jameson Williams to this offense. All right, moving on to the Rams at the 49ers. Puka Nacua, we don't know for sure at the time of recording this if he plays. I think he probably is out there. And of course, if he's out there, he's in your lineups. Regardless, for both of these guys, they're in your lineups if they're healthy, right? Puka and Devontae Adams, they're both out there if they're available. Look, Matthew Stafford has been an absolute force this year. He's second in yards per game through the year, first in passing touchdowns, barely throwing any interceptions. He's been MVP caliber this year. He really has. We should be talking about Matthew Stafford more in the MVP conversation. I honestly think we should be. That's how good he's been. Now, with the 49ers, it's been a little bit up and down. It's been a roller coaster for this wide receiver room, honestly. It's been difficult to gauge one week to the next. We never know if Brock Purdy's going to play or not, or if it's Mac Jones, and we don't know if Ricky Pearsall is going to be out there. Let's play in 2 different worlds. The first world is no Ricky Pearsall. And in that world, I actually really like Juwan Jennings this week. He led the wide receiver room last week in targets and routes run and snaps. But more importantly, I'm thinking about this matchup against the Rams. The Rams are a great matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. The Rams are going to be able to score points against the 49ers. Divisional matchup. I think Jennings is actually going to be much more needed in this matchup than previous games. However, if Ricky Pearsall is active, things get really confusing. I couldn't tell you between Jennings and Pearsall who you should start on a weekly basis. So you're going to have to go with your gut on that. But they are Hail Mary plays at that point, in my opinion. Okay, let's go to the Lions at the Commanders. Of course, you're going to start Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's going to be in your lineup every single week. The Lions, in the bye week, their offensive coordinator came out and said, look, we need to get Jameson Williams more involved. Well, he ended up with 5 targets. Thankfully, he got into the end zone. That's the Jameson Williams experience. If he gets into the end zone, perfect. If he doesn't, awful, okay? And that's not going to change this entire year. My concern is while it's a great matchup against the Commanders who have had so many injuries, they've been decimated, their defense is awful. I just don't know how needed Jameson will be. Like, honestly, if they don't get him a touchdown in the first half, will he really be needed at any point? That's why I've labeled him a risky start. On the opposite side, honestly, guys, I don't know how you trust anybody in this offense. I can't think of a single name I would tell you to start with any confidence. That includes Deebo Samuel. Marcus Mariota will be fine, but I don't think you can trust Deebo. There's no big play threats here. The offense is not going to extend drives. It's disgusting. Let's go to Sunday Night Football. Steelers at Chargers. 45.5 point over under. The Chargers are favored in this matchup. DK Metcalf, we've talked about this plenty of times this year. He's going to be boom bust. That's the nature of the offense he's a part of with, Arthur Smith calling plays. He had 6 targets last week. They didn't need to throw the ball. This should be a much more competitive game against the Chargers, so he is labeled a must start for me. We are also going to see MVS on this team potentially at some point, so that's something you should take note of. The good news for the Chargers is It's a decent over-under, close spread, and the Steelers' defense is a great matchup. They're the second best matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. So Ladd McConkey's going into your lineup. Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen are decent flex options, wide receiver 2/3s this week. But it's going to be Russian roulette all year. Some weeks Johnston will shine and Ladd will shine and Keenan will shine, but Ladd is the one that I have the most confidence in. Here's what I will say. The Chargers have lost both of their starting tackles, Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. So I'm a little bit concerned about Quentin Johnston's ability to, have those big plays anymore, but there are worse plays than these guys connected to Justin Herbert in that Chargers offense. Look, if some of your fantasy football teams are just completely destroyed by injuries this year, then what I've found to be helpful is to play some DFS contests. And week 8, I actually won the DFS contest on FastDraft, the Quick 6 Super Slam. Now you can create your own lineup. It's fairly simple. All you got to do is download the FastDraft app, use my promo code LAND. I'll match your deposit up to $50. And then you're going to get my week 10 rankings completely free. See if you can beat me in one of these contests, all right? Make your lineup unique. That's the key there, but you can check that out in the pinned comment if you want to have some fun. Now, last matchup, Monday Night Football, 44.5 point over under. The Packers are favored at home. It's weird because so often we've said the Packers wide receiver room is a Russian roulette. Well, here's the good news for the Packers. Well, good news if you own Romeo Doubs. They've had so many injuries. No Jaden Reed. Tucker Kraft tore his ACL. Matthew Golden got injured, right? He has a shoulder injury. So really, it's only Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson. Malik Heath will be out there as well. But Doubs is a confident start for me. I really think you can play him. It's a tough matchup, but 10 targets last week. He's been their most reliable weapon. You can put him into your lineup as a flex option. Christian Watson, not the worst desperation play. It's not a good matchup, but they're going to need him. They're going to need these receivers now without Tucker Kraft and all those, Jaden Reeds and Matthew Goldens. Now, on the opposite side there, I am going to start Smith and A.J. Brown with a ton of confidence. It's in Green Bay. The Packers should be up in this game. And in theory, the Eagles should need to throw the ball. Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown are fine plays this week in a decent matchup. You just hope that, Saquon doesn't steal all the points in this one. I appreciate you guys watching the video. Do me a favor, hit the like button, show some love, subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Nothing but love. Draft with me every night this week on the FastDraft app, where there are thousands of dollars to be won weekly. Getting started is easy. Download the FastDraft app, use the promo code LAND at signup to get your deposit match up to $50. That's up to 10 free entries on us. And when you finish your first DFS contest, I'll send you my weekly rankings completely free. Check out the link in the pinned comment to start drafting today.